Everyone thinks they know Canada. Friendly people, cold winters, free healthcare, maple syrup. But the real Canada, the one that never makes it into any travel brochure or geography class, is so surprising, so strange, and so completely different from what you imagine. By the end of this video, you will genuinely question everything you thought you knew about one of the world's most misunderstood countries. Canada is the second largest country on Earth. By total land area, it covers almost 10 million square kilometers. It shares the longest international border in the world, with the United States stretching over 8,800 kilometers. And yet, despite all of that space, 90% of all Canadians live within 160 kilometers of the American border. The entire population of the second biggest country on Earth is essentially huddled along one thin strip of land right next to their neighbor. Think about that for a moment. Canada has enough land to swallow the entire United States, Western Europa, and still have room left over. And almost nobody lives in any of it. The vast majority of Canada, the forests, the tundra, the mountains, the Arctic wilderness, is essentially empty. Scientists estimate that Canada contains more lakes than every other country on Earth. Combined, more freshwater lakes than the rest of the world put together, and most of them have never been visited by a single human being. Here's a fact that stops most people completely. Canada has a lower population density than the Sahara Desert. The Sahara, one of the most inhospitable environments on the surface of the planet, has more people per square kilometer than Canada does. A country with abundant freshwater, fertile land, and a stable democratic government has fewer people per square kilometer than a desert where almost nothing can survive. That is not a typo, that is Canada. Now here is something that will completely reframe how you see Canadian history. Canada was not always the peaceful, polite, universally beloved nation it is today. In 1812, Canada, then a British colony, successfully repelled a full-scale American military invasion. American forces crossed the border intending to conquer Canada and incorporate it into the United States. Canadian and British forces not only pushed them back, they crossed into American territory, marched to Washington, D.C., and burned the White House to the ground. The White House was rebuilt and painted white to cover the burn marks. And that, according to some historical accounts, is how it got its name. Canada burned the White House. This is perhaps the most underreported military fact in North American history. It is barely mentioned in American schools. It is rarely discussed in popular culture, but it happened, and Canada has been politely not bringing it up ever since. Canada has a functioning royal family relationship that most people outside the Commonwealth do not fully understand. The King of England is also the official head of state of Canada, not symbolically, not ceremonially in a vague technical sense. The Canadian Constitution formally the British monarch as Canada's head of state represented in Canada by a Governor-General. Canada is simultaneously one of the world's most progressive modern democracies and a constitutional monarchy headed by a foreign king. Both things are true at the same time. Here's a fact about Canadian geography that sounds completely made up, but is entirely real. Canada has a coastline of 202,000 kilometers. That is the longest coastline of any country on Earth, by an enormous margin. Russia, which most people assume has the longest coastline, comes in at a distant second. Canada's coastline is so long that if you tried to walk it without stopping 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it would take you approximately 4.5 years to complete the journey. Canada also contains something that most people do not know exists anywhere outside of science fiction. In Alberta, Canada, there is a place called the Athabasca Oil Sands, a deposit of oil so vast that Canada holds the third largest proven oil reserves of any country in the entire world. Larger than Iraq, larger than Kuwait, larger than the UAE. Canada is one of the world's largest oil producers, and most people who picture Canada think only of moose and maple syrup. Now, here is a law that will make every American watching this video genuinely uncomfortable. In Canada, it is illegal for a political party to buy television advertising during a federal election campaign. Political parties in Canada are given a strictly limited and equally distributed amount of broadcasts time by law, and they cannot simply buy more, regardless of how much money they have. The idea of unlimited political advertising, spending completely normal in the United States, is illegal in Canada. Money cannot simply purchase political influence on Canadian television the way it can south of the border. Canada also has a law that most countries in the world have never even considered. The Canadian government has a legal obligation under the Official Languages Act to provide federal services in both English and French anywhere in the country, regardless of where you are or how few French speakers live in that region. A government office in rural British Columbia where almost nobody speaks French is still legally required to offer full services in French. Upon request, Canada legally protects a language spoken natively by only about 22% of its population at the national government level, everywhere it operates. Here is a Canadian fact that reveals something extraordinary about the country's relationship with its own history. Canada is one of the very few countries in the world that has formally and legally apologized for historical injustices committed against its own citizens. The Canadian government has issued formal apologies backed by financial compensation for the forced relocation of Japanese Canadians during World War II, for the residential school system that separated Indigenous children from their families for generations, and for other specific historical wrongs. Formal legal apologies from a government to its own people remain extraordinarily rare in world history. The residential school system in Canada is one of the most significant and painful chapters in the country's history that the outside world knows almost nothing about. From the 1870s until as recently as 1996, just 30 years ago, the Canadian government operated a system of residential schools designed to forcibly assimilate Indigenous children into European Canadian culture. Children were removed from their families, forbidden from speaking their languages, and subjected to conditions that resulted in enormous suffering across generations. The last residential school in Canada closed in 1996. Not 1896, 1996. Canada is home to one of the most extraordinary natural phenomena on Earth that almost no one outside Canada has ever heard of. In northern Canada, in a remote area of Nunavut, there exists a meteorite impact crater called the Pingualut crater, a perfectly circular lake formed by a meteorite impact. Over 1 million years ago. The water inside this crater is considered among the purest naturally occurring fresh water on Earth, with a clarity so extraordinary that visibility extends to over 35 meters below the surface. A perfectly circular lake of ancient pure water sitting in the Arctic, known to almost nobody. Here is something about Canadian culture that consistently surprises the rest of the world. Canada produces an extraordinary and completely disproportionate amount of global entertainment talent relative to its population. Jim Carrey, Celine Dion, Justin Bieber, Drake, Ryan Reynolds, Keanu Reeves, Michael Bublé, The Weeknd, Shania Twain, Neil Young, Joni Mitchell, Bryan Adams. All Canadian, a country of 38 million people, has produced a volume of globally recognized entertainment talent that countries 10 times its size have not matched. Canada is the world's most underrated entertainment factory. Canada also invented things that the world uses every single day without knowing their origin. Telephone, Alexander Graham Bell developed it while living in Canada. Basketball, invented by Canadian James Naismith in 1891. The electric light bulb, Henry Woodward, a Canadian, patented a version of it before Thomas Edison bought the patent from him. Insulin, discovered by Canadian Frederick Banting in 1921, saving hundreds of millions of diabetic lives worldwide. Standard time zones, the system by which the entire world sets its clocks, was invented and proposed by Canadian Sanford Fleming in 1879. Canada quietly organized time itself for the entire planet. Here is a Canadian fact that will make you look at the map completely differently. Canada owns the Arctic, not metaphorically. Canada has sovereignty over an enormous portion of the Arctic region, including thousands of islands in the Canadian Arctic archipelago. This Arctic territory is largely unexplored, largely unmapped in detail, and contains resources, minerals, oil, and fresh water that scientists believe may be among the most significant undiscovered deposits anywhere on Earth. As climate change causes Arctic ice to melt, and new shipping routes open across the top of the world. Canada's Arctic sovereignty is becoming one of the most strategically important geopolitical realities of the 21st century. Canada also has a relationship with immigration that is unlike almost any other country in the world. Canada actively recruits immigrants through a points-based system that scores applicants on education, language skills, work experience, and adaptability. Canada does not just accept immigrants, it competes internationally to attract the most skilled, most educated, and most economically productive people from every country on Earth. Approximately 1 in 4 Canadians today was born outside of Canada. The country is essentially an ongoing national experiment in whether a society built almost entirely on immigration can maintain cohesion, prosperity, and identity across generations. So far, the evidence suggests it can. And here is the final Canadian fact that changes everything. Canada is consistently ranked among the top countries in the world for quality of life, education, healthcare outcomes, environmental quality, and social trust. It is a country that has figured out imperfectly, with its own deep problems and unresolved injustices, how to build a functional, prosperous, diverse society in one of the most challenging geographies on Earth. Canada has more fresh water than any other country, more coastline than any other country, the 3rd largest oil reserves on Earth, extraordinary natural resources, and a population smaller than the state of California spread across the 2nd largest landmass on the planet. Canada is not the polite, forgettable neighbor that the world sometimes treats it as. It is one of the most geographically extraordinary, historically complex, culturally underrated, and strategically significant countries on Earth. It burned the White House. It organized time itself. It discovered insulin. It owns the Arctic. And it has been quietly building one of the most successful societies in human history, while the rest of the world was looking somewhere else. Subscribe to Untold Facts, because the most extraordinary stories are always the ones nobody thinks to tell.